Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to What's Happening. My name is Chloe Cooley, and here with me today I have two of my favorite people, my fiance, and then also one of his best friends. So, can you introduce yourselves? Just one of you go first. It doesn't matter.
Okay, I'm Jonathan Duncan. I'm a first year sophomore here, which is kind of complicated, but whatever. Um, I'm pretty involved in the political science department. I've kind of got myself wrapped up in a lot of things in there. I'm a panelist on SJP. That's the Senate Judiciary Panel. I'm political science bachelor's undergrad. I'm a Southerner. Blow Southerners. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I'm Hayden. I'm a junior from Metro Atlanta, Georgia. Also a political science major, and then double minoring in economics and history. And then I'm a member of the Tocqueville Society. So come to our lecture on Thursday. It's going to be a banger. I'm also a member of JCSC, a religious organization, and a political science ambassador.
Yeah, I think, did you say everything that you said you were going to say? Oh, tell your message to Dr. Beasley now.
Oh, yes.
Before
On
you
a previous
forget.
podcast, I was slandered. I think slandered, not libel. Is it libel on the radio?
Know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yes, actually, I think it
Libel.
is.
Okay, I was libeled on the radio, so I would like it to be known, Dr. Beasley, I can, in fact, change a tire. I have changed many a tire in my day. I just happened to be wearing slippery shoes, and I couldn't get the tire lug nuts off that one particular day. Just that one day. Making sure that's clear.
Yeah, Hayden just wanted to avenge himself on that topic, I guess.
Although I think libel is based on damages, and I don't see how that really damaged your
It greatly
image.
damaged me personally.
Okay, well, just so everyone knows what's happening, we have like a little wheel that we're going to spin that has topics on it, and just whatever topic comes up, that's what we're going to talk about. So let's see what comes up first. There's like 16 different topics. We will not get through all of them if I had to bet.
We probably won't get through most of them.
No. Okay, it landed on the Florida bill about social media for people under, what is it, 14?
Under 15. I believe 14 is like the oldest you can be without still having it,
Oh,
if I'm not mistaken.
okay. Well, one of you explain what it means, what's going on.
All right, so kind of like I just said, the Florida House just passed a bill, essentially, that limits social media for anyone under the age of 15, so 14 down, assuming my knowledge is still correct. 14 down, you are not allowed to have social media, which is kind of a radical new thing, especially for our generation, because the end of the millennials going into Gen Z, we were kind of guinea pigs, which sounds bad. And I guess it's more Gen Z thinking about the time periods of it, but we were kind of a guinea pig for how social media really affects people. Because historically, there's never been a level of social connectedness that we've ever had in the world up until the rise of social media. Within seconds, you can talk to hundreds or thousands of people. You can see hundreds of thousands of people, or at least see them how they want to be portrayed, which is a big thing recently, especially. And that's something that, as we've seen over the past few years, has at least some negative consequences. I feel like that's pretty uncontroversial to at least say that. If there are some unintended consequences that it does have. And so this is legislation that's kind of a first of its kind, really limiting to that extent how many people or how many minors can actually access this, given the damages that it can have and the amount of thinking it requires to actually weigh those odds. And the Florida government essentially is saying, we realize that and think that this issue is a little bit more complicated than a kid can really process. So we're going to vote to kind of pull that back a little bit on when you can actually access that.
And if I remember correctly, I think it's referring to social media addiction specifically, because a lot of these things trigger the dopamine loop in your brain, which then, especially at a young age, at the age of a minor, so you could easily form an addiction like that, and it would be very hard to overcome. So it's revolutionary legislation. We'll have to see if it passes through their Senate and gets signed by Governor DeSantis. So
I honestly absolutely agree with it. I think most of us were given social media much too young.
No, when I saw the post on Instagram, ironically, I posted on my story, and I was like, honestly, it's kind of controversial, and I know a lot of people, or at least what I thought would be a lot of people that are against it. But I put it back on my story as a repost and just put like rare W by the government or something like that. And I had a lot of people actually like swipe up and either agree with me or give us their thoughts on it, which were mostly in agreement with me. And a lot of the people that I knew were already politically aware ahead of time were some of the people doing it. But there was at least a surprising plethora of people, if not a majority, then a plurality of people that are not exactly politically active. A lot of people, them I haven't even talked to about politics in my life ever, but still slid up saying, honestly, this is something we need. This is something that I feel like is a net good or an absolute good, because like I said, we're the first generation to have to deal with this. So I don't know if there is anyone that's better equipped to tell you how good or bad it has been than the people that were forced to grow up with it.
Yeah, I don't know what else I could add to that topic, but I think that you did good. And also, we were talking about it yesterday with some of our friends, and like I said, I think that our generation, we became so obsessed with technology, and that whenever we have kids, we're going to be the complete opposite with them. That's my prediction, at least, is that we're just not going to give them any technology. And it's become a trend on Instagram, people saying like, oh, I'm raising my kids like it's the 90s, and they just like put their kid outside in a creek somewhere. And I kind of agree with it. Like, tell your kids to play outside instead of putting them in front of a TV.
I don't support putting children in bodies of water. I need that on the radio here.
No, just to give the historical reference for the day, it's the return of the Luddites is what it has become. Do I have to explain what Luddites are?
Yes, okay. Because at this point I'm confused.
I'm going to make sure I get this right, or else I will be castigated later.
You'll be all right.
Essentially, it was a movement in London around the time of the Industrial Revolution, so the late 1800s, of people that were very against the spinning wheel, because it automated the spinning process, which is something that was traditionally done at home. And so there was a mass movement of people, the Luddites, that went around smashing and burning any spinning wheel they could find in an attempt to slow down this technological step forward, because they believed that it would ruin their way of life, ruin the way of life, ruin the family and the social fabric, and that the negatives outweighed the positives. And so they went around trying to smash all the looms, or destroy all the looms they could, or not looms, spinning wheels that they could. It didn't work out, obviously, but that's just become a phrase, at least in previous generations. That's just been a phrase of, if you're against technology, that's a derogatory term. You can be called as a Luddite, but like, kind of like we're talking about, our generation has been proudly Luddite for a while now, so.
Great job. Do we want to go to the next topic? We can try, see what comes up. We might end up coming back to that one at some point. This takes so long.
They probably all tie together some way. We'll find a way.
Oh, okay. It's SB 129. You want to talk about this one, Jonathan, since you read the whole thing?
If you haven't read the whole thing, you should. It's not very long. It's like 6 to 9 pages. It's very, very not long. SB 129, if you don't know, is the Alabama bill banning DEI in all of the schools and government institutions, which sounds a lot scarier than it actually is at first glance. It closes your DEI offices on campuses and in political bodies like special governments or boards of education, closes those type of DEI offices. The main thing that I've found to actually be relevant on there is it has a list of divisive concepts. So the whole idea is you're not allowed to force any of these divisive concepts, force people to agree, affirm, consent to any of these things that they've considered divisive concepts, which includes like naturally one race is superior or inferior to another. Like, I think that we can all agree that that's a divisive concept. If I were at a school that was forcing me to accept racism as a truth, like as in everybody should be racist, I would not be at that institution very long, and I would hope that it gets shut down. But for the most part, it's not going to change most of our everyday life, as long as you're not in a situation where it's being forced for you to accept it, it really doesn't affect anything. Like student organizations that support social change around the issues that were mentioned in SB 129 will be unaffected. It's all about, we're not putting funds towards this kind of idea of brainwashing, this forcing of ideas onto the upcoming generation in both K-12 and higher ed, which, I mean, to some point is a positive. We should not be teaching kids to be racist in schools, but of course that's not the only thing in the bill. There's other things that are much more controversial, such as critical race theory and other important subjects in our time.
I don't have to go into the bill because that's a pretty good summary right there. And I did not read all 9 pages, so I'll have to add that to my reading list. But I think it just culturally, it kind of speaks to, it was something you actually mentioned last night that I was going to try to spark up a debate because that's what we do for fun. But I was like, yeah, I'll save that. I think the traditional view politically that people vote with their pockets, not that people don't do it, but I feel like it's come to a surprisingly low percentage that look only at that or as the main issue. This election being one of the most recent elections that have followed that trend of, if you look at the most important issues, generally the one at the top of the ticket, at least recently, has not actually been an economic issue. I believe currently, by most polling standards, the immigration has become the dominant issue this election. I think a really telling one would be the election of Glenn Youngkin as governor in Virginia a couple years ago. He was losing that race for a very, very significant portion of the race until at a certain point he stopped really focusing on tax code and economic issues and focused on the schools, focused on the school boards, focused on let's get parents back involved in the lives of children, a very socially focused candidacy essentially. And from that point on is when he actually started to ascend in the polls up until winning on a very, very socially conservative kind of platform, which is not something you've seen for a while. If you go back to the previous candidates before like 2016 for president, because that's what most people are familiar with is the presidential elections, Mitt Romney was not a very out there socially conservative kind of guy. He still held those beliefs, but that's not really what he campaigned on. John McCain was not a very out there kind of, George Bush, not that kind of guy. But you've seen, especially since 2016, but especially in recent history as well, you've seen a lot more socially focused politics. It's a lot more of, let's talk about education, let's talk about crime, let's talk about immigration. It's a lot more of those kind of issues than let's talk about inflation or the debt, as I know one of my professors really enjoys talking about. It's those kind of issues have honestly been cast to the wayside. Not completely gotten rid of course, but I think it's a lot less on people's minds than social policy is now.
I think it's probably easier to write a headline for a social issue and a social position than it is to write a headline on an economic position. Because if I were going to come in and say, I'm going to cut taxes for everyone, or I'm going to implement some other tax system, which I think there's one of those on the wheel, so I'll stay out of that for now. But if I wanted to implement some economic policy, it probably won't make the news cycle as much if I say this like anti-DEI bill, or if I were to do something with the social media ban, where these are both social issues and social legislation, social policy. They make better headlines. As we see, they've reached us. None of us live in Florida. We're all in Alabama, at least currently. So there's certainly a kind of internet or national identity that pushes, the media pushes, of, okay, we need social activism and other things. Now there's other issues that will make media headlines. Economic issues certainly do make the media headlines. They reach my inbox. Granted, I'm subscribed to the Wall Street Journal, so all of those things are economic issues to them. So, but nevertheless, social issues make the media stirs over social issues, and people will vote for name recognition and what the media stirs up. So,
personally, how dare you? I think Fed raises interest rate 0.9% over a month is a very, very interesting thing. But
I mean, I'd read it.
Yeah.
I do read it.
Very few people would that be interesting.
I do read it, but it's people aren't going to vote on that.
Yeah, no, whenever we were coming up with these topics yesterday, I was looking at an article and it was like they surveyed I think it was 10,000 people, and it was like, what do you think is the most pressing issue in America? And only 30% of people said economic issues. Everyone else said different social issues. So that's a thing to consider that kind of adds to Hayden's point here.
You brought up something big last night about the percentage of income following minimum wage going towards the average apartment cost.
I believe that's a thing on the wheel, but we can talk about it now if that's what we're just gonna shift to.
If you want to, go ahead.
Okay, so I saw someone who did some math. I'm trying to pull up a picture to make sure I get my stats right. Someone who did some math. They figured out, or not really figured out, but it's a common trope, I guess, from a lot of the older generations complaining about our generation, that we just always complain about how expensive everything is and don't want to work all that. And so we did the math of the average rent in 1980 was $243. Your average minimum, or not average, but your minimum wage was $3.10. So if you worked a minimum wage job, you'd end up earning around $496 a year. And so you'd be spending about 49% of your budget on rent. Fast forward to 24, it's $1,747 on average for rent. The minimum wage is $7.25. And so your yearly gross is going to be about $1,160. That means on a minimum wage job, you cannot afford rent. Let's just say you double that to $1,450. That means you're spending 75% of your budget on your rent. But to get even crazier, if you look at the average pay out of a bachelor's degree, you graduate in 4 years, get your degree, your average pay coming out is going to be about $24 an hour on average, which means you're making $38,040 or $33,840. That means you're spending 45% of your budget on your rent. That means in 2024, if you go to school for 4 years after high school, you are spending just 4% less per month on your rent than people in 1980 with no degree, some of which don't even have a high school degree, but are working a minimum wage job. That's why our generation is so stressed out constantly, is because we're looking at that. We're looking at factors going into the future, trying to forecast, I guess, which is kind of hard to do economically. But we're looking at how inflation has gone. We're looking at how the economy is going. We're looking at how the housing market is going, how the fuel and oil market is going. And we're just trying to figure out how these puzzle pieces are going to fit. Because if getting a bachelor's was the stereotypical way to success in the past, and that barely gets you to afford rent nowadays, then is the master's going to be the new go-to? When that becomes inflated, is the doctorate, like, at what point is there a ceiling? Because we're all thinking that there has to be a ceiling somewhere. At least the ones that aren't uber pessimistic are thinking that there's a ceiling somewhere. So where's the ceiling going to come? Because that is a crazy, crazy statistic.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. Econ is not my specialty in any means, but I at least know people. We know someone who graduated, was starting her master's degree, but was offered a job, and she works a salary job but spends like 65% of the money that she's making on rent. And that's insane that's where we're at. And I mean, also, like, I know a few other people that even working like above minimum wage, like one of them makes like $18 an hour and can still barely pay rent. So it's just like very scary to me, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. And it surprises me that economic issues aren't at the forefront of our voting if we're essentially drowning in economic problems. But one thing that our generation has had to learn to do is pick what we're stressed about. We get thrown everything that we can be stressed about, and we just have to pick which things that we're going to allow ourselves to actually look at, care about, and like think about actually. So you have the social issues, which a lot of people are like, okay, there's an issue in this area, there's an issue in that area, and they'll pick that and kind of deal with the social issue there. But economic issues, since there's a lot of kind of jargon and it gets in the weeds sometimes, some people will just block that out but other people will dive into that. Like, I consider myself as a Gen Z that is kind of dove headfirst into this economic issue. We recently had a congressman on campus here, and I asked him a question about an economic issue. So I think that it's important to talk to your congresspeople. That's kind of his point. But there's a lot of issues that we have to choose to be stressed about. You can't be stressed about the economic issues and the social issues and your work and your school and your family and how much time that you have, your hobbies. You can't be stressed about all of those things. You can certainly try, but your hair will
fall out probably.
Yeah.
There's actually, and I think I've shown both of you, but there's actually an Instagram influencer that I really enjoy because he's really funny and just makes like common sense opinions and points out common sense things that a lot of people just kind of don't think about. But he actually mentioned one day that our generation is, quote, aging like milk. And that became such a thing that the New York Times actually got a hold of it and ran an entire article on why. Because our generation is aging a lot more rapidly than a lot of previous generations if you look at that. So I just find that kind of funny. But also, to your point, I think a differentiation has to be made of what is currently a voting issue and what is a voting issue for our generation. Because it varies on where you look, because generations are always hard to categorize. But for most of people, Gen Z begins at 2000, 1999, 2000 is where the millennial cutoff is into Gen Z. And so if you do that, born in 2002, currently 21, I've only been voting 3 years. And that's because born so early. And so if you add or subtract 3 years, that means people from 2000 to 2005 have just started voting. We as a generation have not been or are not fully voting to this day. We do not have 100% of our generation of vote eligible age. And so that puts us at an outsized percentage of the total vote. On top of that, statistically, the older you get, the more likely you are to vote. 'Cause there's some people that don't generally vote. And age is generally correlated with your likelihood to vote, which also is unfortunate for us because the largest generation currently in the United States is the boomers who are still alive. And they are all, A, of voting age, obviously, but B, they're very up there in age. And so that correlation between voting and age kicks into where the higher percentage of them that can vote do vote as well. Now, they're actually starting to decrease a little bit in terms of their percentage of the vote, where the millennials are slowly starting to overcome them. But that's a big thing to deal with, is because those are the two big kids on the block, if you will. Whatever issues we might find, even if 100% of our generation was completely on board with this one issue, if the other two aren't, if those two major generations or major players aren't, then it's still going to be a very small percentage of the total national conversation.
I have nothing else to add because, like I said, econ, not for me. Jonathan, you have anything else to add?
I'm good. That sounds pretty accurate.
I think I want to not spin this wheel and do my mother a favor and talk about taxes because she's an accountant. So,
this feels like a trap.
Yeah. This is how they got Capone.
So Hayden wanted me to put flat taxes on here because that's something that he believes in, apparently.
I do.
So let's hear it, okay?
This is not a hyper intelligent belief. Like, I'm not going to break down the statistics and how the percentages work, but essentially the thing that I find most logical, if you will, and most reasonable, which I think I'm going to be killed in class today for just using the word reasonable, but is the flat tax. What that means is, let's just say that we set the tax at 5%. That means across the board, however much you make, 5% of your income will be what is taxed. That does not mean that everyone will be paying the same amount. It means everyone will be paying the same percentage. 5% of someone that works minimum wage is not 5% of someone that earns $50,000, $80,000, $100,000, $1 million a year. It goes up as your number goes up. That's how percentages work. But I think it makes it a lot more simple and a lot more pragmatic for most people, because the system we have now with tax brackets, I think I would argue the vast majority of people, if you ask them to explain it to you, don't understand. Like, even me, who's an econ minor, when learning about them, like, I think last semester was the first time I ever got an in-depth, like, this is how tax brackets work. It might have been a couple semesters before that. But even I was like, this is the stupidest system I think I have ever heard of you pay X amount of taxes on this percentage or this amount to this amount of your income, X on this to this, then another amount on this to this. And so the higher up in income you are, the more tax brackets you fit into. and each tax bracket has a raising percentage of how much of that particular income you have to pay. And I think the problem with a lot of people, a common meme, if you will, for our generation, is why aren't we learning in high school how to pay our taxes or how to file for insurance? Instead, we're learning PEMDAS, and the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
That's valuable information.
Yeah, honestly.
What can I tell you?
But that's what we're learning. And so a lot of people are frustrated when they get out there. They figure out, I don't really know how to do my taxes, and that becomes an issue. And then also when they learn how taxes work, if they ever do learn, 'cause some people just go to TurboTax or people like that to do it for them. But if they ever learn how it works, they're like, this is the most complicated and convoluted system that's honestly, it's not designed to make you fail, but it's very failure prone. Like you feel did I do this right every time you go to do it? And so just on a very pragmatic level, I feel like a flat tax would make life a lot easier and make it a lot more clear if you are truly paying more taxes or not.
Yeah, my mom, she said that she agrees with you on the flat taxes. And I mean, this is what she went to college for, is like, I think she told me one time what her degree was, but it was like something about money and banking or something like that. But so she said that they pay 27% on their income.
Yeah.
Which is insane. She told me the amount. She told me not to say it, but when she told me how much money they have to pay on taxes, I almost crashed my car because I was like, oh my gosh, that is insane. It's just like crazy. She said, quote, there should be riots in the streets. That's what she says. My mom's thoughts on taxes.
I do not support rioting.
Yeah, I do not support rioting. Make that be known for the record. But Jonathan, you can hop in after this if you want. Just one more thing. I feel like another reason is just in economics in general. Besides supply and demand, I feel like uncontroversially, that's the most important concept really you can understand in economics. Second to that is the purpose of incentives, incentivization and de-incentivization. It's a very, very important thing in economics. That's basically the guiding principle behind supply and demand. How do you change it is incentives and de-incentives. And setting up a system that the more money you make, the more money you give to government sounds good in theory, but then you see in practice all the people complaining of, oh, the rich don't pay their fair share, or oh, people are just sitting in the lower class and living off welfare because of the welfare state. Again, another big issue, especially for our generation. The reason you see that is because there are a lot of rich people that make a lot of money that are like, okay, if I can get out of paying taxes by forming my wealth into this, then they're going to do it. Very famously in one of the presidential debates in 2016, the moderator actually asked then candidate Trump, do you pay your fair share of taxes? He was like, sure, absolutely. And then they went into the details of that of, do you actually try to like skirt by the tax code and like try to limit how much you actually pay? He was like, oh, absolutely. To which his opponent, Hillary Clinton, then tried to hit him on that of, well, see, look at what he's doing. Look, he just admitted. And Trump was like, yeah, because I'm smart. I was like, first of all, it's a funny debate moment, but just something like that. It's like, if you can try to limit the taxes because they are so high, then they're going to. Whereas if you just set it at this percentage, there's a large portion of the upper class that would be perfectly willing to, okay, I'm just going to pay that and then we're good. Then we're done. As opposed to, well, then you have this bracket, then this bracket, then this bracket. And they have to go through that process to where more and more of their money is just gone.
Yeah. Jonathan, you want to jump in?
Yes. It's also surprising how much other taxes there are out there. Like when you register your car, there's an ad valorem tax. If you make trades in the stock market or you have an IRA or a 401k, you have the capital gains tax, which is about 30%. So you have people you also have state sales tax, property tax. There's a ton of taxes that we pay on all sorts of things. Uncle Sam is getting his bite out of every single transaction, every single thing that we do. We give some money to the federal government and state and local governments from taxes. We also need to remember that the federal income tax was only a result of the early 1900s.
It was put in place originally in the Civil War. It was disbanded after, and then they did bring it back.
And if I remember correctly, it wasn't intended for permanent use, but it has become
originally
permanent. So I don't foresee us ever having a time without a federal income tax and not paying some kind of federal income tax. We do see states like Florida don't have a state income tax. So there is a possibility in the future that maybe even the state of Alabama will no longer have their own income tax, but we'll have to see because Alabama gets a lot of money from the federal government just through different kinds of grants, and we'll just have to see through what all happens there. But there's a lot more taxes than just income tax, and we do pay a flat tax on sales, and we do pay a flat tax on capital gains. So there are flat taxes that we've experienced out there, just not on the income tax scale.
Yep.
Yeah, what I think was interesting was whenever we went on vacation in Florida and we had to go buy groceries to like stock up the hotel. We bought so much stuff because like you're there for like a week, so it's like you need a whole bunch of stuff. Well, Florida, they I don't know exactly, like I said, econ's not my thing, but the groceries, they don't tax you on what they deem as necessities. So like food, water, those types of things. Like we bought like coffee and things, and those were taxed, but like anything that they deem as necessities, they don't tax you on, which I think is interesting.
The state of Georgia has a separate food tax from their sales tax. Where we're from in Henry County, the sales tax is about 7-8%, but the food tax is like 3-4%. So if you're buying a food item, instead of paying the full 7%, you'll end up paying the food tax rate, which is significantly lower. And that's spreading around the country.
Yeah. I don't know if y'all have it in Alabama, but just a funny tax thing is that Georgia, I figured out one year, doesn't actually tax Bibles. There is no sales tax on Bibles because apparently whenever they introduced legislation to remove that, the congressman or congresswoman, I can't remember because I heard the story from somebody, apparently said something to the likes of, I don't want to tax God. I feel like that's a bad idea. And so they remove sales tax from the Bible. So that's just kind of a funny thing. But no, that's a very interesting policy in Florida. I've been looking into that a little bit.
Yeah, it is interesting. Well, I just was spinning this wheel to see what came up, and it's landed on modern education, but I kind of want to go back to what we were talking about. I think that there should be classes that teach you about taxes and money in high school because let me tell you, I don't know how to do my taxes. My mom does my taxes. I don't even know how to write a check, to be honest. This is why I joke all the time, but I'm so dead serious. When me and Hayden are married, he's the one that's running the books because I know nothing about budgeting or anything, any actual life skills that I should have. I don't really think that I do in that area at least. So that would be, if you're talking about my education reform, that would be what I would think it is.
So just so I'm getting you correct, you would want some like finance class.
Yeah, like in high school.
I mean, I think that could be useful.
Like a personal finance class type of thing.
It seems that currently the state of Alabama, at least for certain educational pathways in high school, is actually reducing the number of like actually rigorous classes that you have to take, such as your sciences and some maths. So I think that maybe we'll see something like that, and I think that it could be useful, certainly, to have people be taught, okay, this is how you balance a checkbook. This is how you make a budget. Most of the time, at least our generation is learning that from the internet, whether they choose to subscribe to Dave Ramsey or they choose some other influencer that lives in this economic realm. But either way, they're mostly learning this economic principle from the internet, and you need to be very careful of which one that you choose from there because, sure, growing debt is bad. Crippling debt is a bad thing. I think that we can all agree on that. You don't want to be drowning in debt. Kind of is just not a good thing. But whether or not you follow what Dave Ramsey says about credit cards or you follow what somebody else says about budgeting, that's up to you. And I think that it would be useful to have something like that in high school that gives you a lot of these perspectives. We're taught all of these things about, like, this is how you read Shakespeare, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. You're taught all of these things that you may not ever use again. And you would certainly be able to use, okay, I'm budgeting for groceries this week because I don't have enough money to pay rent.
Yeah.
Because we're struggling in that way.
Or even things like teaching about like insurance. Like, you know, I know nothing about insurance. I know you need to have it. That's it. Like just things like that where it's like things you need to know to be a functioning adult, you know? That type of thing.
You might struggle to find teachers that know how these things work.
I know.
So, especially in the state of Alabama. But thank God for Mississippi.
Yeah.
True.
I'm going to try to limit because I'm pretty sure, I think it was like a 2.5 hour car ride me and Jonathan had one time where we just talked about, you know what, if I was the dictator, which again, I do not want to be dictator, making sure that is clear on the record. But like if I was the dictator, what would I want to do for education? So limiting how long I actually talk on that. But the biggest thing for me, and this is not an analytical opinion, this is not I'm looking at statistics or going and heavily researching it. This is just a personal experience, what I saw kind of opinion. Although I think from what I have seen from statistics, it's fairly backed up. Of the biggest problem, especially with our generation, going into upper levels of education in like middle school, high school, and even sometimes in college, is apathy, I think would be the best way to put it. Of you have people that are there because they have to be there because high school is just the thing you do. They sit in class and do not learn a thing, do not retain a thing, do not take a single note. They just wing it on the assignments they get. And because of how, at least for me and how it was in Henry County, because of how much the finances for your school are tied to your school's like numeric successes and your percentages and your GPAs and all that, that it actively incentivized teachers and principals to push, okay, we're going to have a bunch of retests and we're going to have a bunch of makeup assignments and a bunch of extra credit assignments. We're going to have all these little baby assignments you don't have to think on to help pad your grade book. And that way it gives every opportunity. The way I described it is that you have to actively try to not fail. That is, I feel like, wrong. I'm not saying it should be easy to fail, but I'm saying that to actually pass a class should mean something. And if you're going to be in high school, it should need to be for a purpose, because there's so many people that are there because it's the thing to do. It's the place to be. It's where their friends are. They don't learn a thing. They don't get involved in a thing. They go through, get the diploma that I got, despite the differences in work, same diploma, same amount of value, and then go and get a job just wherever they can find a job.
Well, and I've noticed just in my first year of college, it's followed me.
Yes.
It follows you everywhere. This kind of, you have the apathy of these people that they don't care about school. They're just doing it because you need a bachelor's degree to do whatever. That they're just doing it because of that. And with there's like grade inflation, and you have these retests and revisions and all of these things being forced. You're going to end up with a less informed workforce, and also a poorly informed electorate when it comes to it.
Yeah, my school was very different than that. They were like, you can fail, we do not care. And they did not make it easy for you at all. So
But did you have to pay to go to your school?
Yeah.
There's the thing. Because once you
they
go
were like
public,
mean though. They were like, we don't care if you fail. Like,
I mean, like I'm not
it's
saying
like do it like. If you did bad on a test, they would never let you retake it, never give you bonus assignments. Like, it was like you had your one shot. And if you did bad, then you did bad. You got to be. And that's, if you're me, then you go home and cry about that.
I'm not saying don't give retest or makeup or extra credit, because there are some classes where that is valuable, and where that one mistake sometimes is just a fluke. It's not the baseline. And so retests are fine. That's not where the issue is. But when it comes, again, going back to incentivization, if you get in for free, you have no skin in the game. You have no reason to care. If your parents paid thousands of dollars and they get that report card back that's saying you're at risk of not being able to come back, and they realize they've wasted those thousands of dollars, then they're gonna make you care. I would reason to believe that's gonna change quickly. If we're paying, you're either gonna stop going there, or you're gonna start picking up those grades.
Yeah.
And so that's a big incentive right there. But I think another issue, which shout out to the Tocqueville again, because I actually was told this and read an article about this by one of our lecturers. I believe it was sophomore year, Dr. Lee Train-Pierre. I think I'm saying his name right. I hope I'm
I
not
don't
bullying.
know.
I hope I'm not just butchering it. But it's grade inflation.
Yep.
I had never heard those two words put together, but apparently, ever since the 60s, the 70s, around the time of the Vietnam War, to not get drafted meant you were in school. And so you saw a lot of people legitimately trying to stay in school and stay on scholarship and all that to avoid having to go to the war, which fair enough. I mean, that's a that's a valid incentive to not do bad in school, is to avoid going to one of the most unpopular wars I think we've ever fought, possibly the most. And so ever since then, you see people actively trying to get better and better grades. And so you see people trying to be more and more generous with the grades, to the point where you have to, again, legitimately try to even fail a class. You can give no effort and get a C and pass the class. And as the common phrase, though I'm not a huge fan of it, as the common phrase goes, C's get degrees. There's a lot of majors and pathways that if you just get C's all the way through, you'll be fine. You'll still get the career you want because you'll get the diploma. The diploma does not have your GPA or your grades or your effort. It just has the same diploma. And so that people can just skirt through and still get it, which I think is kind of an interesting or revolutionary idea, because now you're focusing so much on, can I get that A? I got to get that A. Give me the A. And so now it's becoming more and more accessible to truly get it, because every teacher knows, if they don't get an A, I'm going to get bad ratings, and I'm going to get that. And so the value of your grade is so much more, or so much less now, because everyone's giving out A's left and right. Whereas like back in the day, again, something interesting about history is FDR was not a good student in college. In case you were unaware of this, he routinely got what was coined the gentleman's C, of, given his last name, he was a very popular guy. And so he went to a lot of parties and a lot of organizations and stuff like that on campus. And so essentially he would like strike a deal with his professor of, I'm just going to show up, I'm going to do the work, I'm going to give you some effort, but I'm not going to be the guy that's going to be your absolute scholar, because I have too much stuff to do outside of class to really focus on that. And so you would get what's called the gentleman's C, and that was just common practice up until around the 60s, where inflation started going ridiculous on grades. And so now, like you said, students get a B, think cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria level event.
Yeah. Something that I think is very interesting, which I don't remember where I learned this, but in Sweden, their education system is so different. So like middle school goes up to 16, and if you want to do anything after that, so if you want to go to high school, they pay you, I mean, I don't know how the Swedish currency converts, but it's in America, in US dollars, it's $1,250 a month to go to high school in Sweden. And it's even more than that if you go to college over there. Which, talking about incentives, that is an incentive to go to high school and go to college. And that's a way of saying not everyone has to, but if you do, then you're at least going to gain at least money out of it.
The Swedish currency is the krona, by the way.
Oh,
I was just
I did not
wondering
know
about
that. But I just think that's interesting that they pay you to go to high school and even more to go to college. With every degree, it's like a different amount that you get, but you get more and more as you get different degrees. I think that is kind of crazy, but also interesting. And like housing is supplied once you get into the university. Like you don't have to pay for housing. You literally just have to like pay for food. Like that's it. Everything is basically included. So that's kind of cool.
Back to what Hayden was saying on the grade inflation, though. I'm worried what that means for our pre-health biology majors, at least here, and what that means for nursing majors. That, okay, if you're passing and you're gonna get out of here with a C or like a 2.8 GPA, and you go straight into the field if you're nursing, what is that gonna mean for a bunch of the nurses out there? Am I gonna have a nurse that's gonna ask me where this bone is in my body? Like that. I mean, that's mostly a joke, but it's serious.
And the engineering people too, like that's scary. Like, what if a bridge you're on? Like Hayden showed me this video of a bridge that got hit. What if a bridge you're on, you're driving your car across and it just falls over because the engineer did not know what he was doing?
You need to keep rigor in classes that are life and death skills.
Yeah.
Like, if you have a bad nurse, that could be the difference between life and death. A bad engineer, that's the difference between life and death. So, in certain skills like that, you probably need to be making people try harder.
Yeah.
Like actually put in some effort to get a C.
To give another shout out to the one and only Dr. Benjamin Gross, the notorious BIG himself. A grade should not determine your value as a student. The reason that A, B, C, and even in some cases D is passing, even though I don't think D should be passing because it's just kind of a weird classification. But it's at least A, B, and C. The reason those are all passing is because if you achieve any of those, you achieve a minimum level of acceptedness. But if you do just average, then that's C. If you do slightly above average, that's B. If you do well above average, that's A. It's meant to differentiate your grasping of a concept. That's what it's meant to differentiate. So that way, if you see, okay, in all my math and science classes, I'm blowing it out the water, getting A's and maybe a couple B's here and there. But in my foreign language or English class, I'm just getting C's and D's, and it's just really hard for me. It doesn't mean you can't speak English. It doesn't mean you have trouble speaking or reading. It just means that very clearly may not be your strength. It's that way in high school, if you're just blowing through the science classes, you're blowing through the math class, and you're struggling in the humanities, don't go be a history major. That's what that's meant to tell you. Go be a STEM major or vice versa. It's meant to help differentiate where your strengths and weaknesses are, which then help differentiate, okay, these are the careers or pathways I might need to go down. As opposed to just begging and trying and pleading for an A. You get an A in a subject you're not really that good in. You get a degree in a subject you're not really that good in. And then you leave college, go get a job, and you're like, oh, this is awful. I don't like this.
Yeah.
And that's because you just sailed through because an A is not worth what an A is really worth. So you assumed, well, I'm top of the top on this, and then you get out and realize maybe not. Maybe I should have not done that.
Yeah, that's why I'm so glad that I switched out of econ, because I mean, like, econ was terrible. I mean, I'm not good at math. My mom is good at math, and it skipped over me and went straight to my brother Pearson. I don't know how that even happened, but he's so good at math. He definitely got that from mom. But me and econ do not click.
Hey, but you know that A squared plus B squared equals C squared, and that's all you need in life.
But that is a good point of, if you're bad at something, maybe take that as a sign to stop. Like Jonathan, when he was trying to paint a plate once, was like wanting to rip his hair out, and he discovered the art was not for him.
It's not.
At least in a collegiate context. Just because you're bad at something doesn't mean stop. That can be a very... I do not just permanently endorse that theory in life. I'm very anti that theory.
Yeah.
But in terms of like career, if you're just trying your absolute hardest and you realize it's not your thing, then maybe switch. By putting some context, because in general, just quitting things that you're not good at is not a good way to live life.
No, yeah. But for me, at least, I mean, like, I love my comms classes. Clearly, I'm here doing a radio show. Yeah. Like, I love it. It's much more of my zone than econ.
Yeah, I think more focus on the things that you are good at. Like, lean in. If you're good at math, maybe be a physics major or a math major and go do math for your job. Or even be an econ major or accounting and do math there. But if you're really good at math and not good at English, do not be an English major. Be something that lean into what you're good at. Not necessarily lean away from what you're bad at, but lean into what you're good at.
Both be and don't be a physics major simultaneously until someone actually asks you.
Apparently, if you want to go to law school, be a physics major.
Yeah, apparently that's it.
Dr. Gross made fun of me when he was on here because I said I didn't like physics. And I'll stand by that. If you're listening, Dr. Gross, you haven't changed.
Okay, well, the Schrodinger reference might help a little bit. It might bring up the physics credibility.
Physics is all around us.
I don't care. Don't like it.
You couldn't talk right now without physics.
Do you see that cup? Do you actually see that cup how it is?
I'm not about it.
It's because of physics. It's on the table.
Okay, moving on. I don't want to talk about physics. I spun the wheel and what came up was Hayden's suggestion of American presidents.
Hey,
if you want to talk about that, we
Bubba,
can.
Jonathan.
I can spin it to something else.
Who's your favorite president and why?
You said you put me on the spot.
Okay. Or your least favorite. If you want to go least favorite first, that works too.
There's a lot of presidents. I think 47.
I don't know.
46.
Yeah, I think so.
Something like that. Yep. So, I'll just pick one. I don't know of any of his policy, but Taft is pretty cool. He has a new there's a bathtub in the White House They made a bathtub specifically for him because he was a very large man. Like an incredibly large man.
He did not get stuck in the bathtub. That is a common
But why
reference.
did people say that then?
Because, no, he actually did have a custom bathtub in. That's because if you look at his actual size, he ballooned in weight when he went to the White House. And that's actually because he didn't want to go to the White House. His predecessor, my favorite president,
Probably stressed.
very much, well, yeah, he very much pushed him into going to the White House, and he was very unhappy there. That's why later he's the only man to, as far as I'm aware, I could be wrong, but as far as I can think, he's the only man to be both president and chief justice of the Supreme Court, because that was his career after the White House, because that's where he was happy. He was a former lawyer. That's where he wanted to be, and that's where he ended up and was a lot more happier from that point forward. But no, he was not a super happy guy in the White
I
House.
thought that was like James Madison or something.
I didn't think Madison became chief justice.
There was like one of the early founding fathers that was like
I
on
don't
the
know.
Supreme Court before and then went back.
I
Interesting.
have no clue. I don't think I have a favorite president. I don't like any of them.
Why not? You don't like Lincoln or Washington or who else faced on Jefferson? He's on Rushmore, isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if I had to pick a favorite, I don't even know. Maybe Reagan. I really don't know. Whenever I was asked that question to get a job, I did say Reagan, but I don't know anything that Reagan did. But
And I think that just that
I'll
really
leave it
goes
there.
that goes back to education, I guess, and honestly, how big partisan politics have become, at least to this day. I don't know really our generation, because I think our generation is pretty moderate because of how not moderate the generation before us was. Of everyone's really picking a side and getting their guns. That's like the scene in Pocahontas, the savages, where they're just throwing out the weapons. They're barely even human. Like that, I think it's how a lot of people in some of the previous coming generations have actually viewed it. But in general, I think a lot of people do ascribe to I am a this or I am a that. Therefore, I will like these policies or I will like these presidents. Like if you're on the left side of the spectrum, FDR is a really great guy to look at, or JFK, I know, is a very popular guy. To some people, Lyndon B. Johnson, very, very good president. Recently, Barack Obama, very influential president on that side. If you're on the right side of the aisle, like you said, Reagan, a very popular guy. Lincoln, a very popular guy. If you're a history guy that's on the right, then Calvin Coolidge, a very popular guy. And just a lot of the more recent people that have kind of gravitated towards the right side of the aisle, at least in our generation. Obviously, Donald Trump is a very large figure, larger than life figure nowadays. And so a lot of people gravitate towards him as their favorite president, not because they could tell you policy, not because of actions they did or things they stood on, or even personality traits. Like, again, I don't think Teddy Roosevelt was the best president, but he's my favorite just because his personality, he was such a genuine guy. He'll tell you what he thinks, and he's very straightforward. Even if he's got the wrong opinion, he will stick to it because it's what he truly believes is right. I think that's a very valuable thing, and that's why I really enjoyed him. And I happen to agree with a lot of the policies he was putting forward and issues he went to fight against. But I think a lot of it is just based on, well, this is the person that my side likes, or this is the person that, quote unquote, represents me. And so I'm going to go with them. I don't really know a lot about them, don't know a lot about their policy, a lot about their stances, but it's my guy, so I'm rocking with him.
Yes. Great job. I just wanted to shift because this just came up on this little wheel, which I'm having so much fun with, actually. I'm going to do this for all of my guests now, just put everything on a wheel because this is interesting.
Let me tell
I'm
you what.
sorry, all of Chloe's future
revolutionary.
guests. I'm so sorry.
Well, what came up was the election, so let's talk about that. Let's
Spicy.
place your predictions.
All right, Bubba, go get canceled. Go.
My mom loves Ramaswamy. You can talk about
well,
him.
he's not in the election
I
anymore.
know.
anymore.
How sad.
So, the 2024 election has Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and Robert F. Kennedy
And
running.
Jill Stein.
Yeah.
Oh, and Jill Stein. So, you could vote for any of those four people. Just make sure you vote. That's my stance on the
that is
2024
true.
election.
Just make sure you vote. You know?
Yeah, I'm going to avoid inserting my foot into my mouth and just give you as close to objective thing as I can go. But I'm going to go on more of a cultural side instead of a civic side, since Bubba's got that taken care of, apparently. But I think it's interesting. I'm just going to say interesting. Do with that word what you will. It's interesting that the presidency has never been super popular. Very few presidents, I think, in history have ever had majority of the country actually support them, especially in recent history. Especially with how partisan we've become, because the White House is constantly flipping left, then right, then left, then right. We haven't had a long-running party dominate the presidency in quite a while. But I find it interesting that just by most metrics, 2016, very unpopular election. Both candidates very disliked by both sides, not super popular. Come 2020, we somehow managed to, I think, get possibly an even more unpopular election. You kept one of the candidates, obviously, but you had another candidate come in that was not exactly a super invigorating figure. He wasn't, like I said, he wasn't a Teddy Roosevelt. He wasn't a FDR, if that's your guy, or Reagan, or JFK. He wasn't like one of these motivational, could give you a room-stirring speech kind of candidates. It was more of just a return to normalcy candidate, if you will. Not super ridiculously popular. 4 years passed. We all know what's happened in the past 4 years, just politically on both sides. And we have the same two guys again, despite the fact that they were not incredibly popular, broadly at least. Their bases really loved them, and that's always going to be true, is that you always have some kind of base. But just across the board, these are not like super uniting or broadly popular candidates. And so for 3 straight elections, ignore the voice crack, for 3 straight elections, we've had arguably some of the most unpopular elections possible. But it's happened now again for 12 years straight. I find that interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that we're gonna see, especially with this one, like we're seeing some party shifting happening. So we're currently in the 118th Congress, and it's very ineffective. Like, we are not passing it much legislation at all.
How dare you? I enjoy our 8 House speakers we've had in 2 years.
Yep.
So we're having kind of a drought in actual good legislation, and there's a lot of issues behind that. But we're also seeing some party shifting, and some of that is coming from this. What would you call it? There's like this movement, especially within the Republican Party. I actually saw an ad about this because I think they formed a PAC, and were pushing ads about Republicans against Trump. Like there's a PAC that is actively putting out ads called Republicans Against Trump, which of course Trump is running as a Republican, and if your voter base is becoming organized and deciding to vote against you, that's not going to be a good thing for your election.
Yes. As much as I'm enjoying this conversation, I think I'm going to have to bring you back on at some point, because we got through like 4 of our topics.
We failed
guys.
our one job.
It's okay, though. I think it was good. It was funny. But so both of you, or just one of you if you want to, but I think both of you give your concluding statements, what you want people to take away, think about, that type of thing. Short.
We have
quick.
2 minutes. We're both going to fit it in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Like John said, go vote, be politically active, but make sure you put some baseline level of education. If we continue to not put a baseline level of education behind our political opinions and thoughts, then we can continue to have people run that aren't particularly interested in what we think, as long as they get our vote. And so they'll just say what they think we want to hear, and then just continue to do whatever they really like to do. So make sure you're an informed and educated voter.
Yeah, similar to that, misinformation flies around in a lot of popular media, including social media. And I think that when you see something come through your feed like SB 129, the TikTok ban, or this social media ban in Florida, take the time and possibly read the bill itself. I know specifically for the TikTok ban and in SB 129, there's not a ton of stuff in there. You hear a lot about these like 1,000 page things of legislation. Those are not them. Those are like no more than like 15 pages each. And the House one will let you listen to it. So just sit down. If you're listening, sit down and listen to that while you're going through it. Find out what this legislation actually does, rather than listening to any of us specifically on the radio or listening to social media or anything like that. Just go wild.
Yeah. Good job. I think y'all are cracking me up. I think that hopefully you can take something away from this episode, you know, and not just think it was just us rambling. But this is how our conversations always go, I will say. But thank you so much to Hayden and Jonathan for coming on, filling in for somebody that had to cancel on me, not to name drop because I'm not going to, but somebody did have to cancel on me, and that was very unfortunate, but so grateful for these two people for coming on and filling in. Thank you all so much for listening, and until next time, this is Chloe Cooley signing off.